Do you work with athletes? Have you ever been asked, what should my child eat before their soccer game? How can I make sure she has enough energy to get through the competition? Are there any foods that can help him recover faster? Welcome back to the Exam Room Nutrition Podcast. I'm your host, Colleen Sloan. I'm a registered dietitian and pediatric PA, and each week I'm giving you answers to common nutrition questions to help you become a more confident, compassionate clinician. After listening to today's episode, you'll know exactly what your athlete should eat before, during, and after exercise, and how to nurture healthy habits that ensure a lifetime of peak performance. You'll want to stick around to the end in my nutrition notes segment, where I give you 3 questions that you must ask every athlete regarding their nutrition. Joining me today is Jessica Ashton, a sports dietitian based out of North Carolina. She helps run a nutrition coaching business called Carolina Nutri-Coaching. She specializes in weight management and sports nutrition and loves working with athletes to help them feel better and perform their best. If you're looking for nutrition tips for athletes, you can find her on Instagram and TikTok at Jessica Ashton RD. Jessica, I'm super excited for this conversation. Welcome to the show.
Thanks so much for having me. I'm excited.
So this topic actually was by request from some of my friends and listeners. So I cannot wait to get into this because I know I have a lot of listeners who either have children who are athletes or who work with teen athletes. So let's jump right into what are the main essential nutrients that athletes really need to be focusing on?
So I think that's a good question. And it might sound a little silly or even oversimplified, but athletes should really focus on all of them. I think that if athletes are eating enough, getting a lot of variety, and eating from all of the food groups, like they're going to be getting all of the nutrients that their body needs. Now, there's going to be some extenuating circumstances where someone might need to supplement for certain nutrients or things like that. But for the most part, focusing on an overall balanced, healthy diet is really going to be the most helpful approach. And sometimes I think hyper focusing on one specific nutrient can actually mean that we miss out on a lot of other nutrients that our body needs. I see this a lot with protein actually in athletes, where athletes are so focused on meeting those protein needs that they kind of forget about everything else, and then their performance ends up taking a hit. Now, that being said, I think that understanding the macronutrients, so carbohydrates, protein, and fat, and making them the focus of your fueling is really helpful for athletes. So, carbohydrates are going to be your body's main energy source. Protein is going to be helpful for your muscle building, and really, it's just going to be involved in a lot of other things in your body. Fat's going to be helpful for absorbing vitamins, helping you just feel overall satisfied when you eat, meeting calorie needs, decreasing inflammation, and really a lot more. So they're all going to be really necessary, which is why most of the time we want your meals and snacks to be including a mixture of these. So we're not hyper focusing on any one nutrient. We're really focusing on just getting a variety and really getting all of the nutrients that our body needs.
I love that we open with this question because, I'm on Instagram and I see so many non-nutrition professionals with 0 credentials and 0 training at all giving horrible nutrition advice, especially to athletes, but really in every realm, whether it be fat loss, diabetes, and there's so much fear mongering going on. And so I love that you started out by saying, hey, there's not one specific essential nutrient that every athlete needs to have. It needs to be a well-balanced diet. And there is a lot of confusion with macronutrients. So thanks for bringing that down to the basics because all 3 are really, really important. And we are going to get into some specifics later on. So is there such a thing as a good food or a bad food when it comes to an athlete?
I really try to stay away from referring to foods as good or bad, or even as healthy and unhealthy, because food is a little bit more complex and complicated than that. And I don't feel like some simple good or bad label really gives us the full story. So I'll give you an example. A salad can be a really nutrient dense food full of vitamins and minerals, fiber, just lots of really great stuff. But it's not going to be the best food to eat right before a workout. It's not going to be super dense in carbohydrates, and the fiber and the fats might just make you feel a little lethargic or even give you some stomach problems during your game. So, does that mean that salad is a bad food for you? Well, obviously not, but it's really more about the timing and why you're choosing the foods that you choose to eat. So, like you said, a lot of foods get a really bad rep for just unnecessary reasons. And especially just with the general public, some of those foods that get a bad rep are actually going to be really important for athletes. So, some of the ones that come to mind are just sugar and salt, even just high calorie foods. Those can be really important things for athletes to include in their diet. So, really labeling foods as good and bad just adds more to the confusion than anything else. I have to tell my athletes all the time, like, regardless of what you've heard on social media or just, with a simple Google search, like, you don't need to go low carb or low calorie to be healthy. There's a lot of labeling that makes it sound like those are really good options, but especially for athletes, they're just not. But it's really just these ideas that people get in their heads about what is good and bad, healthy, unhealthy. These black and white labels are just not going to be super helpful for our athletes. Talking about food as good and bad can also just bring up feelings of guilt and shame. It adds morality to the foods that we're eating. And that's not helpful either. Developing that poor relationship with food is not going to be healthy either. And it can have short and long term negative effects on our athletes.
That was so powerful and so well said. And I love the example that you gave with salad because you're right. Athletes, look at salad and they're like, oh, this is a really great option. But sports nutrition is actually much more complex and it's different than for your, maybe 50-year-old woman who's trying to lose fat and gain muscle than a 16-year-old track athlete. They need to eat completely different. And what might be quote unquote good for that 50-year-old woman is not going to be a great pregame fueling food for that 16-year-old athlete. So it's so important to distinguish the two and not give just generalized nutrition labels and recommendations that is like a one size fits all because it's really not. And sports nutrition is really specific. So I'm so excited to get into pre, during, and post game fueling because I think this is where people get a little confused. And this is where parents are really, eager to help fuel their athlete the best because we all know if you eat well prior to, during, and after, you're going to play so much better. You're going to feel so much better. So let's take it in that order. What are some things that athletes need to be focusing on before a workout or a game? And maybe consider like a few hours before and then immediately before the game, because I know, again, there's some timing issues there and it depends on each sport. So just kind of give us some basics around pre-game fueling.
Okay. So I might be a little biased, but I think this is like the funnest part of sports nutrition because this is where you really get to figure out what works for you. So there's going to be some basic general guidelines that are good to stick to, but really what I encourage my athletes to do is figure out what works for them. Figure out what feels good. Pay attention to like what did you eat before your workout or your game and how are your energy levels? Like how did you feel? How did that food work for you? And everybody's going to be a little bit different just because that's how our bodies work. Everyone's going to respond to foods a little bit differently. So take it as kind of an experiment to figure out what works for you and definitely do this in the off season and before your games start. This is when I have athletes starting to get into their season. I'm like, take this time now to really start practicing and working on your fueling because we don't want to try out something new on the day of a game. Like, that's probably not the greatest time to try out some new fueling plan. So, all of that being said, before a workout and a game, we always want to make sure that carbohydrates are the focus of our meals and snacks. So remember that carbs are going to be your main energy source. So that makes sense. We want to make sure we're getting enough energy before we play. Protein and fat are going to kind of slow down digestion. So if they're eaten too close to exercise, they can cause some stomach problems, just make you feel not super great during exercise. Most athletes can eat a pretty balanced meal 2 to 4 hours before exercise or longer. It's kind of at that 1 to 2 hour mark that we start to need to maybe make some adjustments based on the athlete and how sensitive their stomach is. So, some athletes can still do a little bit of protein an hour, 2 hours before a game and be just fine. For some people, maybe they need to stick to more liquid protein at that point. That just tends to be a little bit easier on their stomach, digest a little bit faster. But some people just need to stick to more straight carbohydrates, especially in that hour leading up to exercise. So, the closer we get to a workout or a game, this is where we really want to focus on simple carbohydrates that are going to digest quickly, give us that boost of energy that we need. So, things like juice, sports drinks, pretzels, fruit, dried fruit, even candy. I like to call this a carbohydrate top off. So you might need a carb top off if it's been a while since you ate a full meal, or if you have a really intense workout ahead of you that you're preparing for, or even if you're just feeling kind of low on energy. This is where eating those quick digesting sugars or carbohydrates is really going to be beneficial. And I will add that everyone needs to eat before a workout or a game. Even if you have an early morning practice or something like that, it doesn't have to be a ton, but really try to get in some of those simple carbs. I really discourage athletes from doing any fasted workouts because you're just going to be low on energy. You're not going to be able to perform your best, and you're just making your body work a lot harder than necessary. So, definitely try to start getting in some carbohydrates before your exercise, especially if you're not used to it. Start practicing, kind of get your body used to eating something before your exercise, and hopefully you'll see an increase in improved performance there.
So well said. I think that was such an excellent example. And thank you for giving us those different food options. I work out really early in the morning and you do have to get used to it, right? Like if you're up at 5, like yeah, you're not hungry at that point. So I love that you started out with that tip to do this during off season and learn what works best for you because really you don't want to be trying a pancake before your game and then be throwing up all over the floor. So
Mhm.
trying this on off season is so important. What other quick things could either the coach or the even the clinician could suggest for like parents to kind of keep on hand if they are, running after school to a game and they don't have time to stop and eat something? What are some other quick carb options?
I would say anything like dried fruit is going to be a good option. Those are nice because they're not going to go bad super fast. You could also do something like a granola bar, as long as it doesn't have a whole lot of protein and fat in it. Applesauce is actually a good option. I really like those squeeze pouches that are out there now. They make them for, little kids, and I feed them to my little baby, but it works really well for athletes too. A lot of just those simple carbs that you can keep with you that aren't gonna go bad. I think it's really nice to start kind of stocking up for those days where you're running out the door or you just don't have time to go home and grab something to eat. So, having some things in your backpack or in your car or wherever you keep things that aren't gonna go bad, that you can just continue to restock as you go through them so that you always have some of those high carbohydrate snacks on hand.
I'm sure some listeners are probably squirming in their seat because you said candy, that's okay to have like an hour or two before a game. But if you think about the science behind it, it's a quick carbohydrate that your body is just going to use immediately. I remember, I think it was maybe a few months ago, CrossFit athletes were eating Rice Krispie treats kind of like right before a game. And the internet like blew up over that because it's so controversial, right? It's like, so much sugar. It's so bad for you. So, can you touch on like a Rice Krispies treat or like a candy bar for our young athletes prior to the game?
Yeah, it can be a little bit scary to hear hear us talk about candy that way. But yeah, it's gonna be one of those high sugar foods that it doesn't really sit heavy in your stomach, if that makes sense. You can eat it, you feel a boost of energy, you get that kind of sugar rush, and that's actually what we want for athletes, right? So my tip would be to just try it out. There's lots of different options that you can go to for carbohydrates, but if candy is something that you enjoy, why not try to throw it in before your exercise? Like, I'm all about giving your body enjoyable foods that you will find satisfaction in. So, if candy is something that you enjoy, this is the perfect time to try it out.
I know we've kind of been hitting carbohydrates really hard, but I think this is such an important point that parents and clinicians need to understand that athletes need simple carbohydrates. We are not educating our mid aged adults on healthful eating or diabetes management. Sports nutrition is so different. So I really hope you guys really understand carbohydrates are not bad and your athlete needs them. So let's move on into the game or into a practice. I get asked this question a lot, and it's if they need to be eating during a workout or a long game or maybe even a tournament, how parents and coaches can navigate that. Like, who would need to eat something and what should they be eating?
Yeah, so I get this question a lot too. And not everyone needs to be eating during a workout or game, but there are quite a few times where eating or drinking something for an energy boost can be really helpful. So the first one is if you're exercising for a long time, you probably need to get some extra fuel in your system. Your body can't sustain really, really long workouts with enough carbohydrates. So you really need some extra fuel, especially if you're exercising for more than an hour and a half. That's really when I start trying to look at maybe we should get some more extra fuel in there somewhere. Second is just if you're exercising really hard. So, if you're going to be working out extremely hard, you're going to be going through a lot more energy than something that's not as intense. So, that also might be a time where you need some of that extra fuel. The third one, and this is a really big one too, is if you're not able to fuel really well before your workout, this is a good sign that you might need some extra fuel during. So, this is true for those early morning workouts, kind of like what we talked about before. If you're really not able to get in enough food before your exercise or your game, then having some during your workout it is probably going to be beneficial. If you have really high calorie needs, this is another option for kind of getting in some of those extra calories. So, a lot of times athletes have really long practices and going 3 hours without getting any fuel in is really going to put them in the hole for the rest of the day. So, getting in some extra calories during practice is going to help kind of keep them staying on top of their needs. It keeps them caught up with their calorie needs during the day. And really, if you need an extra energy boost, this is a good option. Try some carbohydrates during your exercise. So, some days maybe you're just not feeling super energized. Maybe you just had a hard workout the day before that you're still recovering from, or maybe you missed your extra snack that morning. And whatever it is, maybe trying out some fuel in the middle of your workout can give you some extra energy when you need it. And as far as what to eat or drink, this is basically the same as we've been going through. The same as what you're eating or drinking immediately before exercise. We want to focus on those simple carbohydrates that are going to digest quickly and not upset your stomachs. So, liquids tend to just be easiest on your stomach. So, that's why sports drinks or fruit juice are such popular options because those are just very easily digested. It's gonna feel better on your stomach than trying to eat something really heavy while you're exercising. And 2, you can kind of take a swig and keep going, keep working out. You don't have to take a full on break to eat something.
So important. And as you're talking, I'm thinking about the soccer tournaments and the volleyball tournaments. You're up at 6 a.m. and you're probably your last game's like 3 p.m. sometimes. So fueling throughout those games is really, really, really important. And again, carbohydrates are king. So keep focusing on those simple carbohydrates during those times. All right, I want to pause and talk about hydration here because we're kind of in the middle of a tournament or in the middle of a long game, and this gets brought up a lot. And I want to start with water. So, how much should teen athletes be drinking, and when should they be drinking this water?
Yeah, hydration is kind of all the rage right now. So, this is a good thing to kind of go through a little bit. Hydration needs are going to vary person to person. In general, though, athletes are going to need to focus on getting their baseline hydration needs, and then there's going to be ones that are going to change based on their training, how much they're sweating, just their exercise needs in general. So, as far as baseline needs go, women typically need between 2 to 3 liters a day. Men typically need between 3 and 4 liters a day. Those are pretty wide ranges for your hydration needs, but the best way for you to really know if you're hydrated or not is to look at the color of your urine. Sounds kind of gross. This is why I leave this to my athletes to do and not to me. But we want to look at your urine and make sure that it's kind of a lemonade color. If it gets to the point where it's like an apple juice color, you're probably dehydrated. And then on the flip side, too, if you are looking at your urine and it looks pretty clear, you're probably overhydrated. And that can be not great for athletes either. So we want to kind of find that middle ground where we're at kind of a lemonade color. And it's going to be best to sip on that water throughout the day rather than just chugging a bunch all at once. And this is going to be true for exercise as well. We want to be aiming to get in, a few cups of fluids in the hours leading up to a workout if possible. And then during and after a workout, we also want to make sure that we're replenishing fluids and electrolyte losses. But we know that losing more than 2% of your body weight during a workout can impair your performance. So our goal is to avoid that. So we don't want to be sweating out so much that we're starting to lose a ton of weight. And for some athletes, we can actually go into measuring their sweat rate to figure out, their specific hydration needs. But overall, just making sure that we're being consistent with our hydration is really the most important thing. It's really easy to get behind if you're not drinking consistently. And if you get to 5 o'clock in the evening and you haven't been drinking enough, drinking a ton at that point right before you go to sleep, probably not going to end super well.
Such a good point. And I think focusing on hydration throughout the day is so important. And I love that you ended with not drinking too much prior to bed, because then you're not going to be getting great sleep. And then your performance for the next day is going to be down as well, too. So I love encouraging my athletes and honestly all of my patients to keep a water bottle with them. Keep it with them, because if it's not with you, you're not going to be able to sip on it throughout the day because you're not going to be thinking of it, right? Out of sight, out of mind. You really aren't going to go up to the water fountain when you're in school and go drink enough for the day. So keeping that water bottle with them, I think, is super important. All right, so you touched briefly on this, and I wanted to get into electrolyte replacement drinks. Who needs it, and when should they be drinking these things?
I think that most of the people that need those electrolyte replacement drinks are usually the same ones that need the carbohydrate replacement during exercise. So, if you're working out in a really hot environment or just a naturally heavy sweater, then that might mean you need to consume some extra electrolytes. But basically, going back to those questions to ask, if somebody needs extra carbohydrates during exercise, chances are they might need some extra electrolytes in there as well. And that's why some of those drinks have both carbs and electrolytes. Makes it really nice because then you're kind of hitting two birds with one stone. And a lot of athletes are going to need both. A lot of athletes have success getting in some of those electrolytes a little bit before they start exercising, kind of thinking about it in terms of just preparing your body for what's going to happen for an intense exercise session, going ahead and getting some of those electrolytes in your body. I think most people can replenish electrolytes after exercise just through their diet, maybe adding some extra salt to your food if you've had a really sweaty workout. But again, hydration needs are going to be really individualized. So we're going to need to kind of look at what is the athlete doing? What's the environment that they're working out in? How hard are they sweating? All of those kind of things are going to play a role in their hydration needs.
Electrolyte replacements are kind of sexy right now, and there's
hmm
so many different options right now. But I feel like if you're not excessively sweating and really doing a heavy, hard workout for more than an hour, if your child is just having like a stretching day or it's just like a lifting day and they're really not exerting themselves much, I think like what you said, just let them have pretzels afterwards or some other salty things after they work out would be a fine way to replenish the electrolytes. If you guys wanted to listen to a few more details on electrolyte replacements, go ahead and check out one of our previous episodes called Plant-Based Nutrition for Athletes, where we did go into some other electrolyte options. Okay, so we finally have made it to the end of our game or our workout. What do our athletes need to be eating after their workout to replenish their nutrients?
So, this is where we're really going back to balanced meals. We've just wiped through our carbohydrate stores with our intense exercise. So we want to have some carbohydrates in there to build those stores back up. This is going to be helpful for recovery and just preparing for the next time you exercise. And then we want some protein in there to help with muscle recovery. Most people do okay with about 20 to 40 grams of protein in that meal. And then we want to include some healthy fats in there too. This especially is helpful for meeting really high calorie needs, decreasing some of that inflammation from exercise, all of that good stuff. I like to see my athletes getting in that meal as soon as they can after working out, giving their body the fuel to recover with. The hard thing is that exercise can sometimes decrease our appetite. So that makes it a little bit challenging sometimes, but some athletes do okay with drinking something. Sometimes that can be a little bit easier to stomach. Something like chocolate milk is a good option for recovery. And sometimes doing that can actually stimulate your appetite a little bit for some more energy later on. So, athletes sometimes will avoid eating after exercise because they don't really want to eat back those calories that they just burned. And that's really something that I try to focus on correcting that thought process with a lot of my athletes because that's really not how your body works. When we're really focusing on giving our body what it needs, fueling appropriately, and really just taking care of our body when we're pushing it so hard with exercise, we really have to make post workout fueling a priority in order for your body to recover well and just to feel your best and perform your best.
So I wanted you to clarify something because I think this can sometimes be a little bit confusing for people is having a meal after working out because whether you're working out first thing in the morning or nighttime, sometimes like a meal can be confusing. So would you consider that chocolate milk drink like right after they work out that meal, or should they then maybe after they drink something, shower, then they should be sitting down for a full balanced meal that's got, some chicken, rice, and vegetables in it?
So that's a really good question. And it's going to be a little bit different for different athletes. So I'll give you a couple of examples. One that you talked about was maybe if you had a game or a practice late in the evening, we might not want to be eating a huge meal at 11 o'clock at night right before we're going to sleep. Some athletes will still need that meal, especially if they're trying to get in, 6,000 plus calories in the day. You can't really afford to just not eat after your workout. It just gets really challenging to get in enough energy overall. So, there's really nothing wrong with eating late at night. Sometimes it just doesn't feel super great for some athletes, and it might not be necessary if you fueled well throughout the day. So, if you have a workout or a game late in the evening, I would just really focus on getting in all of that energy earlier on in the day to prepare for that exercise. So we just do the best with the situations that we can. Sometimes practices and games can happen at weird times, and we do the best that we can to get in fuel after exercise, but the amount can just kind of change. And so sometimes after I've worked out, I'll kind of think back to, how did I do earlier in the day? Did I get in enough energy? Did I give myself a lot of the nutrients and things that my body needs to recover from this workout? Or did I maybe not do a great job and maybe I do need to focus on getting something balanced after my workout? For some people, maybe just doing some chocolate milk or just doing some fruit and a protein drink or a protein bar and some fruit snacks or something like that small. Sometimes that is sufficient for after exercise, but other times we need to be eating something bigger. So it's really just going to depend on the circumstance, but we can do our best to prepare in advance for those kind of weird timed exercises and just do the best that we can.
I think that was super helpful because I think sometimes people overcomplicate it too, like thinking like 30 minutes after I work out, I have to have 6 ounces of this and 4 ounces of that. And they just kind of overcomplicate it when it really doesn't have to be. Obviously, if we're talking high level Olympic athletes or anything like that, that's a totally different thing. And they are going to have their own registered dietitian, literally measuring, planning, prepping everything for them. So, for my listeners who are just general clinicians, parents, and coaches, I think if you can kind of encourage them to eat well all throughout the day and not get hung up or stuck on like one food item or one pregame meal, but really looking at the bigger picture and encouraging an overall general healthy diet that eats and hits all those different food groups and then focusing on those carbohydrates before and during the exercise. I think that just kind of makes it a little bit more simple and easy. But if you have any athletes or anyone who maybe you think might need a little bit more coaching and more specific recommendations, please, please, please reach out to a dietitian, because clinicians, we don't know enough about sports and nutrition. So Jessica is awesome. Please follow her on Instagram at Jessica Ashton RD. So Jessica, I would love to close out with the worst piece of advice that clinicians need to stop telling their athletes.
Ooh. So I think I would probably say anything about following these fad diets. I would say intermittent fasting and keto are kind of the ones that I hear most often, whether it's from a doctor or, somebody just found something about it online. They're really just not appropriate for athletes because they're just kind of working against what your body needs. And that's really what I hope to get across to all of my athletes and to all the listeners today is just when you understand what your body needs, when you understand how to take care of your body, you don't need to follow some rigid, strict meal plan or diet to get in all of your needs. You just can adjust and change things and know what to eat based off of what's going on in your life, based off of what you did earlier in the day, based off of how you're feeling right now. You can listen to those hunger and fullness cues and just really be able to take care of your body and adjust when things kind of change and go a little bit different than maybe you planned. So, anything with those fad diets, I would say, is probably advice that needs to stop getting getting out there. We really just need to give more positive messaging to athletes about fueling their body appropriately. And if they don't know how to fuel their body appropriately, referring them to a dietitian to learn how to do that, just like what you were saying. I think most people kind of struggle with that. We don't do a very good job of teaching people how to fuel their body. And with all of the misinformation and crazy fad diets and information online, it just gets very confusing. So I just love working with people that just want to know and understand how to take care of their body better. And normalizing getting nutrition help, I think, would be super helpful from our doctors and PAs and other medical professionals.
This was such an awesome conversation. I loved learning from you, and thank you for giving us just kind of simple, practical tips that I know my listeners are going to be incorporating and helping their athletes perform at their peak. Jessica, thank you so much for the gift of your time. I can't give this time back to you, and I'm so grateful that you spent it with me. I would love to have you back on again.
Yes, thanks so much for having me. This has been so fun.
I just want to say that I'm so honored that you take the time to listen to my podcast. If you have any questions for me, please reach out to me on Instagram at Exam Room Nutrition. That's all I have for today. So let's continue to make our patients healthy, one exam room at a time. I'll see you next time.